the days when the forester had the croft, the barns and the stables and that were all over here. And these stables were actually here for the working horses that worked the nursery. And the last two horses that were in the nursery was called Rosie and Duncan. And they ended their retiring life in the late 50s. And after that became mechanised, which was a sad day for some people because of the way of life that kind of departed. But this was everything that was up here. This is where the foresters met in the morning. And when I started first in 1952, there was 15 people, including the head forester, that worked here. So the idea in the morning was that the head forester and the foreman met here and they discussed the plans for the day in the stable where the horses were kept. That was discussed, and then we were given our orders and spread our way towards all the adventures we were to do that day as far as work was concerned. Some to the nursery, some fencing out in the hill, some draining. It depended on the time of year. Well, from as far back as I can remember, I would assume that this was always the head forester's house. And from here up into the next premises, there was quite an extensive garden where the head forester was able to provide himself with vegetables and fruit. I was the last of the foresters from, I think it was 1977 up till 1993. So, forester foreman was Donald Carr, and the one before that was John MacDonald, which was a relation of the forester who was before that, William Marshall. We would always thought that Willie, to me, was one of the greatest foresters and ornithologists. He was brilliant. So, and over on this side, we're just going to go there now, is the nursery, which consists of 15 acres of arable land. I'm standing here at the entrance to the main nursery itself. And on each side of the gate you can see 3 sequoia trees, which are probably imported into this part about 1855 or something like that. And there's always a query where there's 2 on one side and 1 on this side, but it just could be through weather conditions and failure to get the right absorption from the ground, it died off. But there's the 3 here, and they're very storm damaged because they're quite susceptible. The branches getting broken off with the wind. The top of the one that I'm looking at now has completely shattered years ago and that, so luckily enough there was nobody near about when it happened. This is where we used to have it ditch hoed and raked so there was not one weed in the pathway going in here. And the hedges were just about 4 feet tall, which have grown out of order now, and they were immaculately kept as well. So it was a different age altogether. It was mostly for windproofing and just for the design of the nursery to separate the fields instead of having fences round about them which deteriorated. Whereas hedges are if they're looked after, they'll last a lifetime, so economically they're more sound and more beautiful to look at. Just beyond me, beyond the trees there is the main water supply for the nursery, which is a very handy thing to have because sometimes we had to do it if the seed beds were getting too dry when we had them. And beside me here is a bath. They would fill that with water and put a proportion of insecticide in so that would be protected from beetle when they went into the hill. And when we took them out of there, they were made onto lines in the ground where you dug the ground on top of the roots to preserve the water supply here. So that was a good facility to have in the nursery, to preserve them until such time as you were needing to take them out to the hill. That was before all the Christmas. These were grown for Christmas trees, but the bottom fell out of the market. Nobody wanted to know about them because it was just uneconomically sound to try and rear them, because there's so much work where you had to take off broken branches, to trim the tops and that. So they were just left to grow up as natural trees. So I would like to see if somebody would come in and thin them out now and make it look like a forest now, or get them mowed, maybe even for commercial use. But They've really grown up. They were never supposed to grow for more than 8 feet. Right, I'm standing here at the crossroads in Dale Nursery, and I'm standing on one of the main paths that goes through the nursery, where at one time, visually to look at now you wouldn't realise it, but they were actually 12 feet wide from bank to bank. This is where all the transport used to move about in the nursery, collecting up plants and anything that had to be taken out of the nursery and that, and where they went from field to field. But there's no way, even if the trees were cut back now, that you could use these roads, because there's too much root system coming from the trees that are growing by the side of the road, which probably stretch about 40 50 yards in each direction. Along here is a place where the last of the Scots pine trees were grown, and they had been in this area planted out about 2 years previous. I remember that was the last trees that were ever lifted here, except for 2 larger beds that were over from the year before. Further up, a couple of beds there consisting maybe about 5,000 plants was lifted from here, and probably from here, maybe got about 20,000 out of this part here. The trees were lined out in beds of 5 rows, which was, I think it was 4 or 6 inches between each row and 2 inches between each plant. And they're put out in beds with a space so that the tractors could transverse over them, wheel on each side, and whatever implement they were using for lifting them, or whatever it was put on the back of the tractor. And if a blade came up and lifted all the plants' roots up, so the men came behind, maybe taking 2 rows at a time each, lifting them and counting them into bundles, 100 or 200. And somebody else came after that and tied them up and shook them into the ground to preserve them until they were ready to get into the hill. So it was quite a lot of hard work involved, but it was satisfying work when you knew that one day you're going to see them growing out in the hillsides and the forest. When the tractor came out, life was a bliss to work, because it was so easy, about 90% less for us to work to do, but at the same time it had a detrimental effect on the actual ground itself, because for decades of years it had only been ploughed and worked by horse, where the only bit of ground that was being hit was the horse's hooves. The horses were quite light, and when the horse plough, if you hit a stone, all you did is you just lifted the tip over like that, and the horse slid over the top of the stone. But as tractors is crunching down the ground, which we realised later, there's a lot of underground drains. The more the tractor worked on it, the more flattened the soil got, and it was crushing the stones underneath. We had an awful lot of trouble with huge stones having to be taken out, because the tractor sunk the ground down so that they had to come out. Because if you're going along in a tractor, probably, and you had it to be a plough or whatever, you're going to wreck something. So a lot of time had been spent on this new adventure of taking stones out of the ground. So through time it had effect. There was a lot of controversy about that. Well, that's me maybe just being anti-tractor at the time, but but we did appreciate the fact that tractors came along for the manual side of it, you know. And economically, there's no comparison. You know how nature's changed the whole. You know, you're visualising it used to be. Remember, you used to hit a golf ball from the centre road there, and you could follow its flight right up to the top of the nursery here. So we used to think if we got the ball over the fence when at number 1 iron, you're playing good golf. Right. Now this area we're in here, it looks like willow, and the fact is that it's quite a wet area, which was probably caused by the heavy tractors and rollers and ploughs and that, which were digging deeper into soil, and was having a detrimental effect on the stone-lined drains that were under the surface. So that's the reason that this area here is quite hungry looking. It's got so wet. In front of us here, that used to be a hedge that we used to trim 4 feet high, and it was cut to that level. That's the amount of growth from 1984 to the present day. So nature's taken over in its own way, and that's what happens when you stop looking after things as they should be looked after. And all these fields at one time, they held between 300,000 to 400,000 plants each. They're probably about about 6 fields in the go at the same time, you know, on a 3-year basis for green crop and resting, and then back into plants into Scots pine again. The record year we ever had for the whole nursery was 1,666,000 from seed bed stage to 3 years. So that, I remember taking a stock of the nursery at that time. I've got a record at home somewhere. And but that just shows you how there must have been at least up to 1 million plants being transported to different places for planting throughout the district and further afield, even down as far as the south of England. So it was quite a well-known nursery at one time. But the boat went out to the market in the 80s and that, and I think it's to do with legislation to do with the transporting the seed, and where you could, a lot of it caused by import of seed and that from foreign countries. Probably the competition was too much, plus the rate at things were growing, at where everything get more expensive by the minute, so the whole thing just came to an end. Right. When they brought in piecework and that, I think it was 4 shillings, which was what, 20 pence. I think it was 20 pence a hundred, that's what you got for planting them. So if you could plant 1,000 trees a day, you were thinking you were wealthy, you know, but my goodness, you had to be flat out for that. When Willie Marshall, the forester, was here, he used to say a good day's work for a man, and weather prevailing, if you planted 700 to 800 trees a day in the way they should be planted, that was a good day's work. And I'm looking across now and I can visualise where the old kiln was, where we used to have the huge fires underneath for the pine cones in to get opened up to extract the seeds from them. I remember we used to put them in there and they got to a certain heat. They probably needed to be about 120 Fahrenheit to open them. And once they were open, they were in trays that had open mesh bottoms on them, where you shook the seeds down and they slid down into troughs to take out the seed, and from there and take them away to get winnowed and cleaned up by hand to get them to a stage where they could go through the winnower, which was a machine for extracting all the last debris that was on the seeds and bringing out the pure seed. And they were carried from here to over here where there was an old army isn't hut, and that's where the winnower was, and that's anything to do with the cones there. They were riddled actually into this building before they came into the kiln, into bushel measures, because the trays were made up of bushel trays and half bushel trays to fit what we had. I think the kiln actually took 15 bushels at a time, but you got about 7 ounces of seed to each bushel. That was a good yield. Going back again, in case anybody had any doubt, that's the charred remains. You can see where the black smoke from the fires that was burning. That was part of the main part where they shoved the logs in. The logs went in, they were probably about 5 feet long and probably about 6 inches in circumference. They used to push them in with a long pole so that you could get another layer of logs in, and it just built the heat up. You had it all fired up with kindlers before that, so it had to be bone dry, and the heat built up and the ferment inside, and the acquired heat was 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So the kiln would be probably about 4 metres long, you know, about say about 2 metres wide or so, 3 metres wide. There's enough space to have a walk inside between the trays, the cones and that. Because there's an old chap that used to look after the kiln. He'd been in the First World War, and I remember his job was looking after the kiln, making sure that everything's going right. And he was one of our heroes, and we used to go in there and when we were boys, when we started here first, and have tea with him. And he'd be in there in the winter time there, he'd be in with a big overcoat on and his cap, smoking black twist tobacco, you know. And we're in there in the heat, 120 degrees, imagine that. And he's in there and he's still got his jacket on. But I mean, that was one of the happy memories he had there. He used to come out there, we was kidding on it, they were feeling all right, the sun was out splitting and stammering with all this tobacco, so fumes had been got. So. But he was one of the old guys that was in the nursery we came. But the thing is, we thought he was old, but the poor man was only in his 50s. So I don't know what they'd think, young boys in to see me now. But they were happy days. So. But that brings back the memory. I never thought about it until I seen the charred remains and that. But this is exactly here the kiln was. And then across from that, there was a long line there of 2 sheds which were used for storage. The end shed had a stone-built fireplace, and I remember having huge fires there. That's where you had your tea in the cold, wet days and that, and you were very thankful to get into the big fire. There's many times you get into trouble because there's a tree over there and you can actually still see the scorch marks where the branches burnt off at the lower level, which got us into trouble with the head forester in these days. And across from that there's maybe you can see where there's a dead tree lying. There was a huge place there, what we called the tractor shed. That's where the tractor and all the big implements are kept. I can remember way back, as late as the 60s, sitting at dinner and watching maybe half a dozen crested tits and the crossbills coming down there, because the attraction was the seed. Because when you're carrying the seed trays out, you're scattering the remains of the seed in the ground. These birds come in there, they were oblivious to humans, could walk outside and say throw up the remains of your tea out in the grass. They never moved. They were too busy gistling into the seeds. I'm standing here beside the site of what we used to call the summer house, which was dating way back from 1881, but you can still see the built-in pebbles where it was actually at the base where it was lying. And it was a hexagon building that was built with 100 plus different types of wood, and it had a hexagon roof on it. And all the parts of the wood were cut to specified sizes in half to make a pattern over the whole thing. And I remember it had hexagon seat inside where we used to sit on nice summer days when we'd be working in the nursery. So inside was a table made up with the small pieces of wood clipped together forming a pattern, and the base of the table was a natural tree stump. It was either birch or some strong hardwood cut, but it was actually just the root of the tree from ground level up, and the top of the table was sitting on that, and that was the whole table. And it was as solid as a rock. There was not a movement in it, so it was well thought out. So it looks as if it's a very kind of dull place to have a summer house, but in the days that was built, you had a magnificent view of the Nethy forest and the Cairngorm mountain range. When William Marshall was fostered here, this is where he had his bees, because it had the whole outlook onto the clovery fields and that were beyond the nursery. But it wasn't so nice for us when we used to be weeding in front of it and that, because you're just quite liable to get stung if you flailed about with your arms. But that was another happy memory as well. Willie Marshall's daughter was still in the village here, Rita, and that was her grandfather. So it made a really must be a very artistic man to be able to do that, because it was enjoyed by an awful lot of people. And Lord Ogilvy Grant, the youngest son of Lord Seafield, took a liking to it, and he actually got people to remove the whole thing up to his house, and they renovated it to its original state, where it got a lifeline started all over again. And there was a replica made of the actual summer house by the head forester here before me, Donald Carr, and he actually spent the whole of his own time in winter nights building a replica of the summer house, but he hadn't the same amount of timber to work with, but he made a beautiful job of it, so can only hope that they look after it and keep it. Well, we've reached a point now we're about 200 yards from the boat end of the nursery, where it goes out to the main road, but it's all overgrown now with grass, which once was luscious, small pine trees ready to be taken out into the hills for planting. There's an awful lot of trees have grown up naturally since 1984 on their own and taken over. Because an example of that is that behind me you can see there's a house up here. When that was first occupied, the way back, there was a complete view of the Cairngorms up here and the fields beyond, Dale Farm and Dale Lodge and all that. Massive views there. Whereas now the whole lot is blocked up with trees and that. But that was the reason that people fell in love with this part of the country. The tree here behind me, as I say, it is the definite king of the nursery, the Dale nursery. And I would reckon it's between at least over 90 feet high now. And it's the only surviving one really. It's still nearly fully clothed. Now this area, which was brought into here in the late 50s and 60s, which we called the seed orchard. And the idea was that when the trees got to a height of 10 feet, we'd cut off the tops of them, and this would encourage growth on the bottom branches. And the reason for it, because we want to cultivate cones, and when you cut the tops off, it would encourage growth at the bottom, where more robust cones would grow, more energy being forced into that part of the tree. And they grew up to an extent where they got beyond 10 feet, and there was cones beginning to appear on them after the 10 to 15 years or whatever. A lot of people think I'm making up stories when I tell you the next bit, that the way they got it was through grafts from upper Nethy forest, and the only way they could get the grafts without having to climb laboriously up a tree, which was probably about 30 feet from the ground, was they fired a gun into the air, made sure there was no nature about or squirrels or anything like that, and the branches fell down, being severed by the bullets, the cartridge pellets, and they take them home and they grafted them onto trees from the Nethy Bridge nursery. It was grafted on so that they actually bonded with the tree, hoping that the best would come, and about 90% of them survived. But the day came when they found it was just economically unsound that they could carry on with it. But it never aspired to any use because of the economic side of forestry. And a lot of people thought there's all sorts of stories that it was storms that had damaged the trees because they've got a grotesque kind of look about them. In fact, they're looking better now than they were, but before it just used to be broken tops. This is what happens to a project when it ceases to be able to look after and nature is taken over. This is what we were explaining earlier on about the seed orchard, where we're going to cut them all over 10 feet and that encourages the branches below to grow out, which will probably grow in a circular fashion out to about 10 to 12 feet, where you get masses of cones. So you've got to visualise that when this was done, up to that 10 feet mark, there were branches right down to the bottom whorl branches here, which were left with bits sticking out, so that to get to the top of the 10 feet we could reach it, which probably now with health and safety is totally out of the question, but they were probably left 10 to 20 years too late. Looking after a weeping willow tree, you don't allow the branches to grow up. You cut them down and they start putting out forces into growing down the way. So that was the whole thing, was to get easy access to cones, save travelling time, and just for a specific type of tree for Abernethy forests, totally brought from that part of the Strathspey. And it would have been a great thing if it had been carried on, but unfortunately circumstances didn't prevail. So the first thing that we probably asked is, well, how's that view bends up there and trees growing? That is because what I specified about having to keep a check on them all the time. If you see branches growing up the way, cut them off right away. If they start growing, the bottom growth's going to start deteriorating and getting weaker and weaker. And that's what's happened here. They've grown up now, and they're growing naturally like a tree would do, through time about 30 to 40 feet of pure timber without branches. Because you usually end up with a Scots pine, which you would say was a perfect Scots pine. About 1/3 of it been branched and 2/3 bare, and that's from a commercial point of view. But there's an awful lot of good things evolved in forestry in the last 40 years. It's the process of natural regeneration. The seed, which have got the wings, as they call it, on it then, and they flutter about and get scattered all over the area. Quite a big success in this area, especially over at Cadwood, which is about 3 miles from here, and it was originally purely natural regeneration. It was never planted, and that's almost about 50 or 60 acres there at the least, isn't it? So behind me here is the outside perimeter of the Dale nursery, and it separates the Dale nursery from the Dale wood, and it protects the nursery from the strong gales that we get up here, protects it too against wild deer. At the time this dike was built, it would be about a foot higher with the amount of soil that's built up since then, so the deer were incapable of jumping over them because they just love Scotch pine plants. And you can see here, this is the original dike itself, unharmed by any outside force, whereas there you get ones where the top stones have been knocked off for that by trees maybe falling across at wind blow, or people maybe want to have a nice rockery in their garden. Well, we've just come in from the road end, about 200 yards, and I'm standing on what looks like a public pathway, but in fact it's a 12-foot road, and this is where all the commercial vehicles that used to come in, taking away plants to go to different parts of Scotland and even to the South England. Probably be hundreds of thousands of plants went away in a load, and in the old days of horses and carts and that, up and down this road. And right in front of me we can see there's the fourth of our trees. We call the king of the nursery with our own name. But you can see now by the height compared to the other trees just how tall it is, and it's still in healthy order. I never realised it was in such good condition compared to the 3 that are up at the top end of the nursery. So, in this area here, that was just used to bring on the seedlings from their seedling state up until 2 years old, when they were put into lines here, 2 inches apart and 6 inches between the rows, so it would encourage root growth. So by the time you took them out after 2 years, you've got this massive crop of root on them. And we used to put them into bundles if I handed, collect them, tie them up, and that's the way they went out into the hill. But this was quite fertilised fields here, but now the ground has slowly got impacted onto the stone drains, where there's a lot of rashes all about, because you've got water coming off the hill at that end, which is slowly saturating the whole area. So, but I can remember here, probably out of this space alone, between the 2 fields, this one here and that one there, you'll probably get about 400,000 2-year-old plants, Scots pine, for planting out in the hill. And we had a scheme here at one time where we'd 3 or 4 different species of trees. You know, we've got Habeas grandis, Habeas nobilis, and larch. There was Western hemlock. They experimented with that, and the spruces, the Norway spruce and the Sitka. But they found out there was too much husbandry to be done about them, because you had to cover them in the winter, some of them, because they're very delicate and prone to frost. So that had to be abandoned after time. Well, they actually come up from more central Scotland, and they come up and gathered the cones. In them days it was from Tormore Distillery, on the other side of Granton's Bay, up to Glenmore, and the other side beside Abbeymoor. So that was all seeded estate, so the seed was collected within that range. So there was no outside seed cones gathered at all, it was all inside that. And they used to take them up to the Dale nursery, and they got 13 and 6pence a bushel, which I think is about 60 to 70 odd pence in the modern money. But I always remember when they used to come in with the bushel measures, you had to be very careful when you're measuring out the bushels, because they'd be trying to give you a short measure in the bushel. They'd be offering to help to fill the bushel, but we would say, no, we'll do this ourselves. We used to measure out the bushels for putting them into the kiln, and out of every 100 bushels you'd probably get about 10 bushels. It would just waste chips of wood and dead cones and dead branches. And I always remember the last day when they used to come up there, they used to get paid on the final day, and remember the storage sheds I was telling you about beside the kiln? Well, there was a shed there, and they used to go in there with their working clothes and that, and this wee parcel under their arm. And when they come out, I always remember they used to come out with the suits on, and all dressed up, and that was them ready to go off and spend their money. So you have to guess where they went. But they were great workers, and they were hardy chops and that. But they must have gone through a lot of hardships to get the amount of cones they did, because through the years they've taken thousands of bushels of cones in there. Just I was kind of worried in case my mind wouldn't go back, but the fact that things were brought to my attention, I could see different pinpoints. It brought us all back, and can remember just vividly what it looked like. And that. Sometimes with trees that have grown, you're inclined to think, well, that's not the same place, you know. But I enjoyed every minute of it. So. Oh, it's very sad right enough, but the thing is just you've moved to move along with what's happening in the world, and it's hard to see it, but I'd like to see it as a better use than this. Even if they used it commercially and took the trees away, and because you get a lot of pleasure out of just coming through the place and seeing it. Then you could get the money out the thinnings and got to the ultimate end of the final crop. You've got a beautiful green carpet, lush grass and flowers and that growing. So, but it'd be quite interesting to see. They might do something about it one of these days.